You're watching NewsX. I'm Rishabh Gulati. Let's have a quick conversation on what is becoming a very serious global situation, even as India itself is in the midst of a general election cycle. Israel now says that 99% of the 300 drones and other aerial vehicles that were launched from Iran en route to target Israel have been intercepted. This would be the largest coordinated airstrike that Iran has tried to undertake onto Israeli soil. All sorts of proxy wars and pretense is now over. You are seeing a confrontation and a hot war beginning between Israel and Iran. The impact of this, for obvious reasons, in an already complex global situation is very large. Let's quickly open up this conversation. Arjun Hardas is joining us. He's been a senior journalist, Ambassador Basupati Mukherjee on the broadcast with us, and General Katoch on the broadcast with us as well. Arjun, let me touch base with you first to help us understand what the situation is. Can you give us a quick overview of where things stand right now?
Well, as for now, people there is a of course we don't know what's going on in the inner circles within the Israeli government, but obviously there's a reckoning happening about how to retaliate back, because as you've been following in the news, is that Arab countries have also assisted in a way and have sort of taken, if not a neutral, then a relatively positive view towards Israel versus Iran, and they have gone out of their way. Now, if Israel does not, if it kind of backs off from some kind of retaliation, it doesn't have to be military. There are other ways as well. If it backs off from some kind of retaliatory action, it'll put a pause on the Arab thinking as well, that whether Israel can be trusted to carry out what it's supposed to do. And they have to bring in their standard operating system of deterrence has to be retrieved. Has to come back, because after the Gaza attack on the 7th of October, that went for a toss for a while. So these are the kind of things they're planning. They've seen. Luckily, there has been no damage. Comparatively, one base in the south was hit by a.
So how is this being considered? Because so far it has been more than innuendo that the rocket strikes that we saw in just the last couple of days from Hezbollah, and you already mentioned October 7th. That Hamas and Hezbollah are allegedly by the Israelis aided, abetted, operated, supplied by the Iranians, and that's where the rockets come from. But regardless, that's a proxy scenario. To the best of your knowledge, would the Israelis now be looking at this as an act of war of a sovereign country attacking another?
It's been an act of war for many decades now. I mean, this is nothing new that has happened. The only difference is that Israel had made it very clear, and so had the rest of the world, that especially the West, that any attack directly from Iran will be a state of war, open war between Israel and Iran. Now, the question was, the war doesn't mean, and General Katoch will, of course, understand this better, war doesn't mean just going in, exchanging weapons and bombing each other's targets. There's much more to that. There are more subtleties involved in it. And how Israel will respond has to be seen in the future. They will not disclose their strategy. Can it be a military strike? Can it be a cyber strike? Can it be something else? Maybe a complete destruction of their proxies.
Okay. For the benefit of people watching this broadcast, June of 1981, it was called Operation Babylon, when an Israeli Air Force mission went and struck what were suspected to be nuclear facilities in Iran. But let me quickly get Ambassador Mukherjee. Ambassador Mukherjee, for the past several weeks and months, the pressure has been from every quarter on Israel to end the war, to look at the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We saw just a few days ago that there was an NGO that was feeding people, that people lost lives. So all the pressure has been on Israel to end this. Why would somebody in Iran decide that this is the time to launch a drone strike on Israel? Why would that be? Why would they want to escalate this?
Well, Rishabh, let me be the devil's advocate for a change and to say the following. The West has accused India of carrying out extrajudicial killings in a third country, and they have lectured us, sermonized, and told us how to behave. Now, in this particular case, no matter how close we are to Israel, there is no doubt that Israel attacked Iran's embassy in a third country causing the death of 3 senior army generals. That is actually an act of war. It's against international law, and you cannot go and attack the embassy of a sovereign country, member of the United Nations, in a third country. But since international law is two-faced and is interpreted by the West according to the concept of the bureaucracy, which is show me the face, I'll show you the rules. So there has been no chit-chat about the fact that Israel actually broke international law and started this off, in my opinion, very foolishly opening a third front when they have not yet finished off what they wanted to do in the Gaza Strip, and where at any point Iran's proxies and Hezbollah could start making life difficult for them in another border, right? So under those circumstances, this barrage of missiles and drones, they may have been shot down by the West, but let us not forget that Russia's head of state, Putin, has today warned that they will not allow an attack on Iran to be carried out with impunity. Moreover, it is time for the West to understand that Iran is a very large country. It's heavily populated. This is not a Syria or an Iraq with Saddam Hussein having so-called weapons of mass destruction. This is a country that is used to martyrdom. And this is a country that possesses nuclear weapons.
Okay.
It would be extremely foolish for the West to accelerate.
Okay, in terms of reciprocity, ma'am, in terms of reciprocity, are you suspecting now that the Israelis have conducted a strike and the Iranians and therefore responded with a strike? They now say if you hit back, then we try to hit back again at you, and it'll be a larger strike. Do you think that the point scoring at least is over for now, and there are other options available, or do you see this escalating?
No, I am sure that the Iranians must have conveyed through Qatar to Israel that they have to do this to save face. And they did what they had to save face, because their embassy was attacked and 3 generals were martyred. They have to do something, so they did it. I would be surprised, since in my perspective, Iranians are very intelligent people, much more intelligent than several Goras I won't mention on your channel. I don't think they will escalate it further unless the Israelis, egged on by the West, are foolish enough to escalate again. If they escalate again, definitely the Iranians will respond.
Okay.
But in my opinion, I think after this exchange, which must have been covered through backdoor channels,
okay,
hopefully things will calm down.
Okay, so now let General Katroj, let's go back to the 6th of October. So 7-8 months ago, there was a new sort of a world order emerging. You had the Abraham Accords, you had the Riyadh Agreement, so the war in Yemen between the Saudis, proxy war between the Saudis and Iranians was coming to a close. You were hoping that at some point of time a Saudi-Israeli association would start, and within this context you were talking about G20 and IMEC and things beyond that. Now we seem to be back to square one as things have been for the past 5 decades. Why is that? Are there any actors working cohesively to this, or is it all just a rather mucked up chaos?
Thank you, Rishabh. The way I look at it is sometimes in international affairs, events take place in which I do not think even the leadership of the larger countries has any control. And I think one of these events took place in October when the Hamas carried out that brutal attack on the Israeli civilians. Now, that was a complete game changer because it put the Arab world in a very difficult situation. If they continued with the rapprochement with Israel, then they would be seen as anti-Muslim. And so, if you notice at that point of time, there was a very let me call it a diplomatic silence, which took place at that point of time. Now that Israel has escalated the war as far as the retaliation on Hamas is concerned, but that was actually drawing to a close now. That attack, what it really did was the rapprochement which was taking place between Israel and Saudis, that came to a close. That was the end of the Abrahamic, in a sense, of the forward movement the Abrahamic Accords were taking. So the only beneficiary of that, I think, has been the Hamas, because had this accord taken place, I think Hamas as a political force would have been reduced to a very significant extent. Now, coming to the present situation, you see, I agree with the Ambassador Mukherjee. If Iran didn't attack, they would have lost a great deal of credibility. But I personally feel that they have gone horribly wrong in the type of target they have chosen. You know, you don't attack the Israeli mainland. 185 kamikaze drones, all shot down. 110 ballistic missiles, only 7 got through. And 36 cruise missiles, all shot down. Now, what is the result which they have gained? I think you have put now, the entire world focus has changed. Israel has gained a great deal of sympathy. And I personally won't be surprised if Israel retaliates.
Okay, so here
I just want to give you the idea of the retaliation. I think if they retaliate, it is going to be most likely on the Iranian nuclear facilities. That is something which has bugged the Israelis for long. Now they have an excuse, and perhaps they may go in.
maybe or maybe not. Professor Nalapat, before we look back at why it's happened, let's just examine on what happens next, because that is of material immediate value. Are you suspecting that the Iranians had a rough understanding that the kinds of munitions we are using, most likely they will be shot down? So we need to respond, but we also need to understand that we escalated further, than the Americans get involved, and then things also get out of our control. That the fact that the strike itself has been ineffectual was perhaps a computation rather than a coincidence.
Rishabh, you're absolutely right. The fact is that this barrage of missiles took place over 5 hours, and it took place several hours after Iran had telegraphed a warning. I think more than a day since they telegraphed a warning to the United States that they were going to attack Israel. And the attack took place over 5 hours, which gave the anti-missile defenses of Israel, France, and the United States enough ample time to bring down 99%, quote unquote, of these missiles. If you had an entire barrage of missiles, maybe 300 or 400 or more than this barrage, coming in a space of, say, 20 minutes, there would be no way in which several of them will not get through any iron dome. So the way the Iranians attacked, they were quite certain that there would not be, unless by accident, any kind of an Israeli casualty. And they would have definitely telegraphed the targets in advance, so there would be no human casualties. And as it happened, there was one injured young girl, very unfortunate, but that was it. So this attack was planned in such a way as to inflict 0 casualties. It was signaled by Iran that Israel, don't believe that you're out of bounds. We have got you in our sights. And if the Iranians were to multiply their attacks, and don't forget, this is not Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and Israel is not the United States. George Bush had an obsession about Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and I'm sorry to say Netanyahu has got an Iran obsession. And as a consequence of the obsession, if he escalates this very frankly, then you're going to see those barrages come, and we're entering into a completely uncharted situation. Don't forget, Saddam Hussein, no WMD. The attack on Syria intensified after Syria gave up its chemical WMD. Iran has got plenty of WMD, and one thing that Netanyahu has done, he has ensured that Iran is now going to work at full speed on developing a nuclear bomb. He has basically, ensured that the Iranian mullahs are going to develop a nuclear bomb. So I would like to say very clearly, if Netanyahu retaliates, I can tell you all bets are off as to what
because
the Iranian action is going to be,
the consequences,
and what the impact is going to be on the whole world.
So you saw what happened on October 7th. That was the Hamas, most likely funded from abroad. Most likely they got the weapons and the technology and the capability of making those many thousands of missiles.
From a very advanced country.
I'll call it most likely via proxies, but the original parts are manufactured, made in China. Now, they, within the scope of minutes and hours, not only had the ground attack, but there were thousands of missiles that were fired, knowing that a percentage of them would overwhelm the Iron Dome system. This seems like a warning shot. Now, what's the response going to be? Arjun, now we know for a fact that the Hamas administration lives in luxury in Qatar. Okay? For sure, some of the generals are floating around in Syria. For sure, they have some kind of leanings in Yemen, and for sure, they might have some kind of contacts, funding, suppliers, coordinators, even working out of Iran. Now, to your best estimate, what is the level of escalation that is likely to happen, even if that might be unfortunate?
It's very difficult to say, Rishabh, but the fact is, as Professor Malapat has said quite clearly, is that it's a warning shot from both sides. What sort of, and as I said earlier, what kind of retaliation? See, because Israel, while Iran had to save face, yes, had to do something to save face, Israel has to also do the same. Now the question is it going to hit back at Iran? As I said, doesn't have to be military. It can be other methods as well. Cyber strike, a neutron bomb, so to say, that can destroy a sort of what do they call it? The electromagnetic pulse bomb, which can fry every electronic in Iran without harming anybody. There are a lot of options available. But it's a question of seeing what they do, because deterrence is critical. Israel's entire raison d'etre is its deterrence. It's a small country. It requires the deterrence to survive around its thing. And that deterrence has taken a major hit on 7th of October. So maybe it will not hit back Iran directly. We don't know for sure. But, and of course, it's not as easy as, let's say, hitting Damascus or Jordan, or, in its previous years, Jordan and Cairo and all that. It's a very different situation. Iran is not the Arab countries. However, the more approachable thing is to attack and destroy Iran's proxies, which are sitting right next to its borders, which includes the Hamas, which includes the Hezbollah. That is the next target which they do. If they destroy those proxies, including the Houthis for that matter, then it'll give a strong message to Iran, because Iran has been involved here. Just 2 days ago, there was an official report by the Argentinian government, by the new president, who's released a report which was long pending, that Iran was the one responsible, it has been named as the one responsible for the destruction of the Jewish center at the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires.
Okay.
30 years ago.
Okay. So, yeah.
So this is not a new thing that is.
So that's an example of how long this proxy war is, of course, been going on. And it is a proxy war. Now, the only questions that really remain is, and let me get Ambassador Mukherjee back into this. Ambassador Mukherjee, now, there was a strategic interest of certain parties far above the heads of Hamas in creating the disruption that happened on October 7th. Is it still in their strategic interest to keep on escalating this? To have the Americans get involved and the Israelis and Americans tie up and have a sort of generalized engagement in the region, which will be Syria, will be Yemen, will have to drag in the Saudis, will then drag in Iran. Who knows what happens in Turkey, what happens in Iraq? It becomes a generalized engagement. Whose interest is this in now?
Actually, in my perspective, the Bibi has not been able to achieve Israel's military targets in Gaza and instead has inflicted shocking civilian casualties, ensuring a perpetual state of enmity between the Palestinians and the Israelis, which will be a direct threat to Israel's existence. It is in nobody's interest for Israel to attack proxies of Iran, for instance, the Hezbollah, because the immediate result of that will be that Lebanon will once again be plunged into a horrific civil war. Moreover, as the Hamas has demonstrated, the Hezbollah has the capacity to inflict damage on Israel and Israeli targets. And an attack on Iran's nuclear facility at this point by Israel would definitely trigger a major regional conflict, which would not be in Israel's interest at all. Because as it has been rightly pointed out, it is a small country that depends on deterrence for survival. That is true. And if there is prolonged war, its economy will also be affected.
Yes.
Definitely. So it is in everybody's interest to calm things down.
Yes.
And last week I thought we were going in that direction until the Israelis decided, in my opinion, very foolishly, to attack the Iranian embassy in Syria. They should not have done it at this
Yes.
point.
So for sure, it is not in Israel's economic interest, and the reason Israel is considered a wonder economy of the region is because it has done so well on the scientific, economic, manufacturing, design and R&D front, and that's not in their interest. But the security interests sometimes override everything else. And what is the security interest is sometimes difficult to establish, pinpoint. General Katoch, now we can sort of understand a sort of geostrategic logic to the sudden outburst from Hamas, highly weaponized and deadly outburst from Hamas. But now, given the complexity and what it is generally is a quagmire, because the Yemen, didn't get resolved. Syria is not getting resolved anytime soon. Iraq is not getting resolved anytime soon. Turkey has its own problems. The Iranians have their own internal problems. Who wants a generalized mess? Who wants to light that fire now?
Very frankly, Rishabh, I don't think anybody wants a generalized fire, especially in West Asia. Let us look at it practically. The bigger countries here, China and India, for us, a conflagration in West Asia will be disastrous because we are dependent on our energy supply from there. The only two countries which really don't have to depend on energy from anywhere else is Russia and the United States. And I don't think it will suit either of their interests, despite the fact that they don't need this energy to have a conflagration here. But the point is, when things go wrong, then people don't really look at whose interest is being served. After all, then people reverse the whole argument. They will say, okay, if this country loses so much, I will lose less. So we are playing the minimum loss game instead of the maximum gain game. And I think that is the situation which is going to develop here. Because the conversation within Israel, especially as far as the government is concerned, is to say that, okay, they have 300 plus missiles, munitions have been launched against us. And if we do nothing, then what is the credibility of the Israeli government? So they will have to do something, the way Iran had to do something. I just feel Iran could have actually chosen a different target. But, they didn't choose to do that. And now the things may very well spiral out of control.
Okay.
And I think if they spiral out of control, that India is going to be very badly impacted, despite the fact that we are not really a party to any of this
Okay,
tweets.
I'm going to address that in just a second. Professor Nalapat, now, if indeed these gets out of control, okay, and an escalation cycle is a bandwagon, that's an ugly one. What happens to the rest? The Saudis, for example, have a discomfiture for Israel due to historical reasons, but they have even greater issues with Iran. And in fact, the Riyadh agreement ended a proxy war in Yemen, which was between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So what do the rest do? What does the Jordan do? What does the Saudi do? There's a deep split in the OIC between the Qataris and Iranians on one side and the Saudis and the Emiratis on the other side. I don't think the split is going to go anywhere.
Look, I'd like to say very clearly that I have been a long-time supporter of Israel. Arjun Hardas knows that very well. And I simply hope that Benjamin Netanyahu basically, understands the situation and does not escalate by retaliating into what is essentially what's called a soft bite, a non-attack really on Israel, in which no damage was done and no life was lost. Frankly, that is the best way would be to not retaliate, and because the reality is that the Iranian regime has got tens of thousands of these missiles. Heaven alone knows how much it has acquired in the way of atomic stocks. Now that is going to be accelerated at very, very high speed, and it's very difficult to track and trace and destroy them. Netanyahu has been trying for a long time to involve the United States at war with Iran, and the United States has not fallen into a trap, even under Trump, because it knows it would be a catastrophe for its relationship with the Middle East. And why? Because every country has got a Shia population, including Saudi Arabia. But there's a significant Shia population even in Saudi Arabia. And, if you ignore the fact that there is going to be an attack by Israel on Iran, well, those populations are going to get very restive. And may I point out, Ariel Sharon was the Israeli leader who made Israel the unfortunate target the only country under Shia terror attack is Israel because of Sharon's decision to support the Maronite Christians in Lebanon in the 1980s against the Shiite militia. He had no business getting involved in the Lebanese civil war. He did. Netanyahu will add to Sharon's mistake by 100 times over if he retaliates now against Iran. As a friend of Israel, as an admirer of Jewish people, I pray that Netanyahu restrains his incident. Let him think about his brother Yonatan. It is because of Yonatan Netanyahu, a brave and heroic martyr of Entebbe, that Netanyahu became the success he is. Let him think of Yonatan, and Yonatan will tell him, Bibi, don't go into a two-front or three-front or a conflagration when you're heavily involved in one particular front. And that is a front against Hamas that after 6 months, you have not won. You are not nowhere close to winning. So, Bibi, don't do it.
Okay.
I am telling as a friend of the Jewish people, as a friend of Israel, Bibi, hold your horses and listen to what Yonatan Netanyahu, your elder brother, who died a hero, would have told you today.
Okay. Arjun, what is the general view that you're understanding amidst Israelis themselves? Obviously, ideally, they wish that this had not happened on October 7th. That this was not something they have to live with on a day-to-day basis. And I'm hoping most reasonable people want this to end one way or the other. So what are people thinking? Is there a hope, or is there still a feeling of betrayal?
No, if you're referring to the Gaza operations, definitely people don't want this. People didn't want it to happen in the first place. But but with the Hamas sitting right across, within a few 100 meters, literally, from where they are. Iran is other side of the Gulf, Persian Gulf. But with Hamas sitting right here and their open declaration of destruction of Israel repeatedly, which they make it very clear, not just Israel, but of the Jewish people, and with a proven record of what they did on 7th October, they want these guys gone. They said we can deal with the Hamas, we can deal with the Palestinians, the other PLO leadership, etc. We can deal with the Palestinians. We'll come to whatever has to be done, but the Hamas has to go. So, but now also there is a sort of a fatigue setting in, but there is a fatigue setting in, but at the same time, there is also a feeling that this has to come to an end one way or the other. Obviously, the hostages release, if there are any, frankly, nobody's even clear about that, if there are any hostages alive as yet, after 6 months. But if there are, that is the release of the hostages is the critical thing, is the critical requirement, most basic requirement for a ceasefire. After that, other things can happen. Maybe whatever has to be done between the two sides, whatever between Qatar with Egypt as mediators, whatever it is. But the hostages have to be released. There are children there. There are babies. One who spent more of his life in captivity of his age than his actual age before he was kidnapped. He's now 1 year, 4 months old.
Yes.
So this is not to be forgotten. And these are Iranian proxies. Let's not forget them.
No, yeah, I mean that's
war.
Yeah, that's mostly common knowledge now. Okay, so the issue then is that who really wants to go down the slippery slope of escalation, or do you see an opportunity here for things to de-escalate? Ambassador Mukherjee, let's look at it from India's perspective. All right, we had a good association with Israel. At the very beginning part of what happened in the aftermath of October 7th, we were staunchly supporting them. We've taken views subsequently in the recent weeks on the humanitarian issues in Gaza. We have a cordial relationship with Iran, but at the same time, we have ships deployed who are taking on the Houthis. It's a complex situation. How do we walk forward on this?
We walk forward very gingerly, always keeping in mind that Israel-India friendship is very special to India, and that Israel is India's strategic partner and has been so and will remain so. And that like Israel, we live in a highly hostile neighborhood, so we understand what Israel is going through. At the same time, we have repeatedly, privately cautioned the Israelis that killing of Palestinian women and children is giving an entirely wrong message, and Israel's efforts to try to push the Palestinian population into areas controlled by Egypt would then shift the Palestinian problem to Egypt, which will draw in the Egyptians and the Arabs into a totally anti-Israeli position. So that strategic error of Bibi initially did not go down well with mainstream Arabs and with the Egyptians. Maybe they've abandoned it, but their basic policy was to push out the Palestinians from their territories and push them into Egyptian-held territory so that they transfer their problem to Egypt. That is not going to happen.
Okay.
De-escalation, talks are going on. Each time there seems to be some progress, some new problem arises, whether
Yes.
it is an attack on an embassy or it is a counter-strike. But right now, what is really, really important is to have a ceasefire, some information about the hostages, because as a co-panelist pointed out, they must be in a pathetic situation if they are alive, hidden in those tunnels, and some clarity about where they are and how many have survived, because Israeli public opinion will not allow any Israeli prime minister to back down and accept a ceasefire until there is full information about the hostages. That's a given.
Okay, fair enough.
Once that is given, it could be possible to take the talks forward,
Okay.
provided Bibi does not continue with his policy of pushing the Palestinians, because when Mr. Hardas talked about Israel accepting some other forms of Palestinian leadership, it is important for us to understand as a democracy that the Palestinians must be free to select their leadership. Most Palestinians support Hamas, unfortunately. They don't support the PLO. So if Israel insists on bringing in the PLO, having some kind of leadership of the...
That's the ugliness in it. Again, General Katoch, how do we, I mean, the official statement is the reasonable one, de-escalation and return to diplomacy. But it's not necessarily a war of our making, but we're all going to suffer consequences, global economic consequences, if it gets out of control. What do we do?
No, I think as the ambassador has said and Mr. Madhavan Alpat has said, we have to tread very gingerly. I don't see any other option because really we are not in a position to influence either of the warring parties. Any advice which we give to either Israel or to Iran is not going to be taken. In fact, any country giving advice to these two countries is not going to be taken. And a time comes when people say, okay, we understand it may not be to our self-interest, but our pride and prestige demand that we do what we have to do.
Okay.
And I am quite certain that as far as Israel is concerned, if they have to take on a target, it will be restricted to the nuclear facilities because that is something which has bugged the Israelis for a very long time. They may not go in for any other target. But now they've got an excuse, okay, we have been attacked, and they may actually plan an attack to disable some of the facilities which they are aware of.
It is possible because we are no longer living in a world where quick and decisive victories are available to even the greatest of powers. The Americans can't achieve it, so nobody is going to here is going to achieve it. So in internecine war, like what you see in Ukraine, that grinds on and on and on, it's the people who end up suffering. Arjun, quickly, 10 seconds, I need to wrap up.
What is your question?
You wanted to make a point. I thought you raised your hand.
No, what you had said about the attack that happened on Iraq was by the Israelis in 1981, the attack on the nuclear facility. And that was something that was required at that point. Imagine if they had gone in for the Gulf War 10 years later, had Saddam Hussein acquired nuclear weapons. That was his open objective. He had openly said that this is meant for a particular area south of Lebanon, which is pretty clear what he meant.
Okay. I mean, the rest can't say it. I can say it. Do the Iranians probably have a nuclear weapon? Probably right now, no. Are they capable of producing a dirty bomb that is radioactive? Absolutely, yes. Do the Israelis have a nuclear weapon? Maybe. So we don't know where things stand. Hopefully, the players know. And what you're seeing is a sort of Cuban Missile Crisis moment. Sometimes when things get escalated, that's the point when common sense comes back and logic comes back because the cost of going on increases exponentially. It is to no one's benefit, not the Saudi benefit, not the Israeli benefit, not the Iranian, Yemeni, Lebanese, Hamas, Hezbollah. It's to nobody's benefit to have a generalized, chaotic escalation at this point of time. Let's hope that's what the consensus that drives a de-escalation. I thank my guests. We take a break. See you in a minute.